this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about essentially how I have been figuring out, because it's an ongoing process, how I'm figuring out to merge something that I personally feel very passionate about with my professional life, because I wanted to bring those two things together. So with that, let me start telling you a little bit about, let's see, clicking should go to next slide. There it is. So first, this is a little bit about my professional life. Program evaluation, I work on federally funded STEM projects. My areas, I started off in computer science education projects, primarily National Science Foundation and also Department of Education, done a few in industry, in the tech industry, moved into including engineering education. I've also recently started doing some work in the realm of geology and the geosciences, and have also recently started taking on some large-scale research infrastructure projects that don't have such an explicit education component as the other ones do. So my professional world for about 10 years, because I've been doing this for about 10 years, has been really immersed in computer science and engineering types of projects. And when you take a look at my personal passions, it has to do with something that seems on the surface to be very different. You know, I really love to be outdoors. I mean, when I'm not working, you'll find me, you know, hiking or in the ocean, because I guess I should mention I live in San Diego and I'm fairly close to the water. I do a lot of volunteering with various organizations around, you know, environmental issues. I am a big proponent personally of trying to see if I can get myself to, you know, as close to zero waste as possible, which basically the ideal, if you get to zero waste, is that, as it says, nothing is wasted. So trying to keep things out of, you know, out of the trash bin, out of the landfill, you know, trying not to be just a mega consumer. This has been kind of my personal world for, you know, my personal passion as long as I have, you know, been an adult. And so these two things have kind of existed, you know, in their own little world. And for many, many years, this is how I thought about it, that there is this divide between these two aspects of my life. There's my professional life, in which, you know, I'm all in computers and engineering, and I sit at a desk and I'm behind a computer. And yes, I do travel a lot, you know, to go to sites. But again, you know, I'm not out in the woods. I would love to be out in the woods. But that's not my professional world. That's not what I do. And so I had all of these reasons, because for years I was thinking, what could I do about this? And so these are all the reasons that I had laid out for myself in my head. I'm not in the environmental field. I'm a computer scientist. I have an engineering and computer science background. My projects aren't environmental projects. I'm not out there doing things, you know, in the woods or with the dirt, the land, the water, whatever. That's not the kind of thing I do. And then I had this little voice in my head saying, you're an evaluator. These aren't, you know, your projects. It's the PI's projects. The PI's, you know, it's their project. So, you know, what say do I have over that? And, you know, the follow on that is, I'm not getting hired to work on environmental issues. I'm getting hired to work on computer science education issues, or engineering, or, you know, more recently, you know, geology, but it's not geology out in the field. You know, it's a lot of things with supercomputers and parallel processing and things like that. So I had that narrative going. At the same time, I'm not interested in changing fields. I've got 4 degrees already, 4 post-secondary degrees. There's just no way I'm going back to school again. Besides, I love my field. You know, I love being a computer scientist. I love, you know, I have a background in education. I love the clients I work with. I get them, they get me. You know, my projects are exciting. They're fun. I love what I do, in other words. So it's not like I wanted to throw it all away and, you know, try and start over again. And then I started looking, okay, well, what's out there? And everything that I was finding didn't seem to apply to me. There were resources out there about evaluation and the environment and sustainability, but they seem to always talk to someone else. There's a lot of really cool information out there about environmental projects in, the developing world and internationally. And there's a growing body of projects, domestically here in the United States about the environment. But again, they seem to me to always be speaking to people who were on these quote unquote environmental projects, and wasn't me. And I was feeling for a long time like I was stuck. Okay, what do I do? So then there's this voice in the back of my head that was saying, yeah, but really, if we're going to drive environmental change, it has to happen everywhere. Just like I'm trying to incorporate it in my life, it needs to be incorporated in, not just in my personal world. This has to be beyond quote unquote environmental projects. So there has to be a way to, move the needle forward on this. I think that's a bad analogy, but move things forward. So then I had a reset, and this could be viewed as going from a deficit mindset to an asset-based mindset, because I took a look at every one of these objections that I had developed for myself, and I came up with the counter. So I'm not in the environmental field. Well, that's only if I judge by traditional academic disciplines. Yes, my degrees are in computer science and they're in education, and I also have a few other random degrees that don't have anything to do with any of that. But who says I have to judge what field I'm in based upon, an academic department label? So throw that one out. My projects are not environmental projects. That's crazy. Every project impacts the environment. Everything we do in our life impacts the environment. So that means my projects do too. So yes, they are environmental projects. This idea that they are my projects, that's just crazy thinking. That is ridiculous. Part of being hired as an evaluator is to give my perspective and my view and my suggestions and my recommendations. I do that all the time. So, and I feel I have ownership over what I do, of course. So why was I suddenly telling myself that I was powerless? Because I'm the evaluator. It's like, I've never thought that way in any other aspect of running my business. Why was I suddenly telling myself that here? And this point about I'm not getting hired to work on environmental issues, repeat, every project impacts the environment. So those all got thrown out the window when you just look at it a little differently. And this idea that maybe I had to somehow change fields or throw out all my projects and get new projects, again, that's nuts. Of course I don't. Why was I telling myself I had to do that? That was only if I came at the issue from a very traditional siloed mindset of, you are a this, therefore you have to do this and you can't do that. So it's like, I have done all sorts of things in my life that were non-traditional, think outside the box, what people didn't expect me to do. Why should it be any different here? And then the point about there not being a lot of direct resources, there does seem to be some truth to that. I wasn't finding a lot that talked about, okay, how do you incorporate environmental issues into, these other types of projects like the ones I do. But I could view that as an opportunity. Well, let's see what we can do to, come up with resources and, break some new ground. I love breaking new ground. See what we can find out and then help other people to do it. And that, in fact, is one of the reasons that when Matt asked me if I would come and, talk at one of his topic chats, I said, perfect. This is one of those opportunities in order to do that. So mental mindset change. Here are two organizations that really have inspired me in this direction as well. Because another thing that I had thought for a long time was that you had to be, if you were going to be a socially conscious business, you had to be a nonprofit. Again, that's kind of like old thinking in my mind. It's the nonprofits who are doing social good. It's the nonprofits who are focused on, changing the world, all of that stuff. Well, guess what? I discovered there are all sorts of ways that you can be a for-profit business and you can have an orientation towards changing the world, doing good things, having an orientation towards, you know, people and the environment and communities and all these things. And these are two that I learned about along the way. And I put their links up there in case you just want to check them out yourself. B Corp businesses that are B corporations are for-profit companies that have their structure, their whole entire structure is built around having an orientation towards, you know, people as, yes, they're profit-making entities, but their orientation is towards, you know, benefiting the wider group of stakeholders and not, you know, just say, you know, if they're a public entity, you know, they're, what's the word I want? The people who own the stock. So you can actually become a B Corp, which I haven't done, but it's something in the back of my mind. But to discover that there are all sorts of companies out there who have it built into their, you know, their very fiber, that the way they operate, and some of them are large. Patagonia is an example of a B Corp that is, you know, enormous. That, you know, you can do this. It doesn't mean you have to be, you know, become a nonprofit. Nothing against nonprofits, but I'm not interested in having my business be a nonprofit. So you can read all about B Corps, and you can get a lot of information about how B Corps operate, even if you don't go to the, you know, extent of becoming a B Corp yourself, because they have a lot of information, you know, freely available to tell you what does it mean to be a B Corp and how do you run yourself. And there is a book I found, which I will hold up, and I will also probably refer to it again a little bit later, that gave me a lot of ideas for the things that I started to do to change my business. And we'll see if Zoom will make this fit. Yes, sometimes Zoom doesn't blur things out. But this is called the B Corp Handbook, and it's the second edition. And it's a very practical book, and it's designed for people who are interested in becoming a B Corp, and it steps you through, do this, do this, do this. Have you thought about this? These are, you know, these are the issues that matter. One whole section of that has to do with the environment. It covers a lot of other things: workers, community, environment, governance, customers. It covers a whole range of things about, you know, what it means, you know, to have this different orientation. But there's a whole chapter on the environment, and it says, you know, as a business, look at these things, consider these things. So this was hugely inspiring to me. And then I stumbled across this other organization called Conscious Capitalism, which is, again, it's an organization and of businesses that are profit-making entities that have a very explicit orientation and a charter that if you want to join, you know, you can sign on to the charter that, you know, says we are going to be putting, you know, these other things first. So it's similar to B Corps, but, you know, there are some differences. And if you get into the weeds, you can, you know, see what it is. They have a local affiliate here in San Diego. So I went to some of their meetings and, you know, got a feel for, you know, what are they all about? What do they do? And again, you can read all about them online. And so right here, I had in front of me two examples of, you know, organizations that were like umbrella organizations for all these, you know, companies that were looking at the world much more the way I wanted to look at the world. And they were still, you know, profit mattered, but it's not the driving force of everything. An example of a company that is part of the conscious capitalism movement is the company that makes WD-40. They are one. So if you're curious, you could look them up. So anyway, I got really inspired by these when I discovered that, okay, you know, there are some resources, and this is an example of a couple of them. And I dwelled on them a while just because they're good places to look if you're going, you know, give me some inspiration. Oh, Jason's holding up his WD-40. That's cool. So anyway, so I just decided go for it. So after attending the AEA conference in 2019 and going to, you know, hear some of the sessions that inspired me to think about environmental issues, I just said, I'm going to make a commitment. I'm going to figure out how to do this. And so I said, and I put it out there on social media in order to make it real, so I couldn't chicken out or anything. I commit to incorporating environmental sustainability into all aspects of my business. That didn't mean I knew exactly how to do it right away, but I was going to do it. So that meant there were two realms to tackle: how I run my business and my client projects. So procedures, operations, all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and then the work that, I sign those statement of works and contracts to do. And they were very different. So this is a little bit of information. I can only put so much on a screen about how I'm targeting the business end, the behind the scenes end. And I got a lot of my ideas from that B Corp book that I was waving at you a minute ago, because they really told me, look at this, think about this. And so some of this seems really kind of obvious when you think about it, but it makes a difference. And, even I, who'd been trying to think about these things, had missed a few of them. So, the thing like, replacing the light bulbs, I went on a scrounge through my house and discovered some that I had missed. It's like, oh, I just decided I was going to find every darn light bulb that I could, and I was going to replace them with LEDs. And so I did, but I didn't throw out the old light bulbs, because again, I'm trying to keep things out of the landfill. So I took them up to a thrift store and offered them, and they were happy to take them, because there are people who, would be very happy to get perfectly functional light bulbs and use them. And I didn't have to throw them out. So, especially in the time of the pandemic, buying local is really important. It saves on greenhouse gases, and it supports the local economy, and it's good for people. And when I say recycling is the second to last resort, the last resort is putting anything in the dumpster. But recycling is not the first answer, because the less I can use and the more I can reuse, the better, because we can't recycle our way out of the environmental mess that we're in right now globally. That's a whole other story about why recycling is not going to be the answer. On a higher level, I started looking at my purchasing policies. Now, I'm a small company, but I have implicit policies about how I buy things. I just never hadn't actually thought about them. If I need a new, chunk of paper, a new packet of paper, do I just run down to Staples or wherever and grab the cheapest pack of paper? Or do I try to look at, sourcing some paper that's more environmentally friendly? Where do I find it? Who do I get it from? And I travel a lot. There's no question I travel a lot, and I probably blow out my greenhouse gas emissions by getting on airplanes. But I started looking at, all sorts of ways that I could just do something to improve my environmental footprint there. And there's lots of things you can do, whether you're reducing your travel or, purchasing carbon offsets. And my comment there about you don't have to bankrupt yourself. You can do these things in small steps. You can do them incrementally. There are less expensive ways to do things than you might imagine. It's not, you spend a little time starting to investigate, how you can do some of these things, and discover that, yeah, it's not, you have to throw out this enormous, chunk of money. So I've been rather pleased to discover that. So there's a lot more to it than that, but we only have a limited amount of time today. So those are just to give you a few ideas about, how to think, and to realize that these are not all big, big complicated things. And you get a tax write-off on most of this. That was just a nice little Benny to, to remind myself that, yes, normalizing environmental considerations. This is how I approach dealing with my client projects. I'm not trying to change their projects into traditional environmental projects. I'm trying to start to include in both my existing and my new projects just this idea of thinking about the environment when they make decisions, or just where I have the ability to make decisions, just making those decisions. And it starts to just make it just something that you do. And that's how I'm including it. And so I have 4 categories, and I'm just going to quickly run you through a couple of examples from each of these categories of how I have handled this. So the first one is asking questions. You know, just we're having conversations about whatever we're having a conversation about. You know, just throwing in things. You know, given that it's going to be nice weather, what do you think about holding that event outdoors? You know, that can lead to a discussion of, oh, what, you know, why? And then you can have a, you know, short conversation about, you know, various things that might be positive about doing that. You know, can we ask the IRB to allow us to conduct online consent instead of on paper? Sometimes people don't even think about it. They just assume. And your IRB might be okay with doing it entirely online. You know, while we're at it, would you mind if I also make notes about the built environment? Because later you will see I will be able to include some of that information in my report. So the basic idea is you just think of ways to ask some questions that have a connection to the environment and the project. And it opens up, you know, just an opportunity to talk about some things, and you're not trying to, you know, suddenly start lecturing them on anything. You're just normalizing the idea that these are things you think about. And related to this, there are plenty of times where I have choices that I can make. I mean, one of my biggest pet peeves is individual water bottles. It's so convenient, quote unquote, or we always do it, or people expect it. Well, if I'm running a focus group, I can decide we're not going to supply individual water bottles. I can ask people if I can carpool with them if we're traveling. You know, we're all meeting in North Carolina. You know, can I meet you at the airport? And rather than each of us getting our own rental cars, since we're going to the same hotel, can we go together? So it's things like this that are very low key, but they get people starting to just think about things a little bit differently and how they're running their projects a little bit differently. And then starting to slide into, you know, reports, information, again, that just normalizes these kinds of considerations, and they will view it as added value. You know, you know, mentioning here that 4 of the respondents, you know, mentioned they appreciated the online interview format because they didn't have to drive. You know, saying this here, you know, the survey, you know, the survey wasn't about this, but the fact that several people mentioned it, I choose to include that as a side note in the report. So it's, you know, it's bringing that up. And there are 2 other examples here where I just mention things, you know, as part of the overall context of the report, gives them additional information, normalizes the idea of, you know, oh, there are some benefits to doing things this way. And it can spur conversation. And it also it shows that you are giving, you know, more than just what they, you know, expected. So there's some added value there. And it's not too hard to slide this in. It's not like I'm suddenly putting in lots of extra hours or anything to do this. And this is kind of, you know, one of the key points. You don't have to do this all at once. I made it part of my business plan. I actually put it into my business plan every month. You know, one small piece of this I was going to do. You know, this month I'm going after the light bulbs. This month I'm taking a look at something else. This month I'm taking a look at something else. And I also started putting it out on Twitter when I first started doing this, that I was doing it, just basically because that makes it real for me, and it holds me accountable because I put it out there to the public that I'm doing this. And as you are talking to new clients, again, you can just mention your interest in this as you go, and you will start, the more people start to get the idea that this is something that matters to you, you will start to attract people who share those values with you. And over time, you will find people to work with. You may still be in whatever field you're in. Like, you know, I'm still in computer science and engineering and, you know, some other STEM fields, but I'm starting to, you know, bring people who want to work with me who also think that this is important. And that's a win-win. You know, I like my projects even more. I like my clients even more. So that's kind of the big thing. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. And at that, since I'm watching the time, I want to stop so that we can have a conversation.